Hello. Movies, soap operas, Harry Potter, Princes, Frogs and Ugly Sisters, synchronicity, memoir-writing, and the 6 archetypes of love. These are just a few of the topics that Professor of Literature, counsellor and author Dr. Allan Hunter has tackled in his books, courses and classes. But which 10 books by other authors influenced him the most on a life path that took him from Oxford University to working with troubled adolescents, to travelling extensively and living in many countries such as Madagascar, Peru, India, Belgium, Italy, Switzerland and more, to finally settling in Boston, where, when he wasn't penning his own books, he was Professor of Literature at Curry College, Boston University and Bay Path University. Let's find out. Dr. Allan Hunter, welcome.
Thank you. It's lovely to be with you.
Allan, you've spent much of your professional life exploring how literature and storytelling, including soap operas, tap into the deep and unarticulated needs of society, and especially the ways of the heart. And you say that it's from these powerful influences that we shape our lives and ultimately our destinies. Tell me a little bit about your relationship with the books that shaped your life and destiny.
Yes, indeed, there are so many books that have shaped my life and destiny, which is why I took to studying literature when I was an undergraduate. But the list that I've put together here is, I think, very much in tune with everything that you stand for in the No BS Spiritual Book Club, because I see the list that I've created here as a starting point. But really, these are sort of not so much the basics, but the essentials, it seems to me, that would remind us of what it is that we need to be reminded of, that it's so easy to forget. And so the very first book on my list is Don Miguel Ruiz's wonderful tome, which is The Four Agreements. And the Four Agreements are perhaps rather straightforward, but I read this at a time when I needed to be reminded that making things complicated was not going to be more productive than staying with the basics, than staying with what essentially is. And at this point, I'm reminded of things that occur in the Bible, for instance, where Jesus is asked what the most important commandments might be, and he comes out and he just says very straightforwardly what they are. And one of those, which has always tickled me, I think, is love your neighbor as yourself. He didn't say love your neighbor as yourself if he's like you and if he's white male but don't love him if he's Muslim or etc etc etc. Well, he couldn't have said Muslim because Islam hadn't been founded yet. So Don Miguel has this wonderful, straightforward 4-part harmony, you might say, of ideas. He says, first off, you've got to be impeccable with your word.
We are definitely receiving some static, and I really don't want to mar this interview. So if you could jump off and come back, and let's see.
All right, let me do that. I'll be back with you in no time.
Okay. And while he's with us, let me tell you what Allan wrote. He said that he rereads the Four Agreements by Don Miguel very regularly, and he's always found it immensely helpful personally in his counselling practice as well as in his own life. And I think as this book comes up so many times in the book club, I think it does the same for many, many people. So let's see. So we've got Allan back. That's good.
Are we crackling again?
Not at the moment. Not at the moment. That seems to have cleared it. I hope it doesn't come back.
Yes.
So I was just reading a little bit of what you'd written about the Four Agreements and how it's impacted you personally and how you use it in your counselling.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you would like to continue what you were saying.
Okay, well, I was just saying that the Four Agreements are charmingly straightforward, but they're reminding us of absolutely essential things. Be impeccable with your word. Say it, mean it, choose your words carefully. Wow, how often do we need to be reminded of that? And self-talk is also part of that.
Yeah.
What you say to yourself, be impeccable with that. And the second one, which is I remind myself of every day, is don't assume, don't make assumptions.
That's a big one.
It's
That's
a
a really
huge
big
one.
one. Yeah, I find myself doing that all the time.
Well, don't we all? And so Don Miguel's words are, don't assume that it's about you. It might be about something else. It might have nothing to do with you. Don't take on something that isn't yours. So, that's those two, I think, are really important. He also has a wonderful reminder, which is do your best. Always do your best. The number of times, I'm sure, when we've all felt like, oh, well, I won't try that. And that leads on to nothing good. But if we're doing our best, we can't reproach ourselves with anything later. So those agreements, those are 3 of the 4, those are the ones that really resonate, I think, most with me. And Don Miguel has gone on to write other things which are, I think, equally powerful. But these 4, I return to that book from time to time and say, okay, I need reminding here. This helped me at a time when I was trying too hard to please people, when I was assuming all sorts of things that weren't necessarily true, when I perhaps wasn't always doing my best because of the assumptions. So it's a very, very powerful book. So that would be the first one, I would say. There's absolutely no BS in that book.
None at all.
None at all. It's short, it's to the point, and it's like, like all the good bits in every major spiritual teaching, as I said in the Bible. It just says, treat others like you'd want to be treated. Boom. No ifs, ands, or buts.
When you think about Rudyard Kipling's If and how long it is, and it's brilliant, but in 4 lines, Don Miguel has written. It's the Bible. It's what we should live by.
I think so. I think so. And things that are short and direct go to the heart. Things that get to be long and overly complicated and overly refined, they go straight to the head. And when information goes only to the head, we don't feel it, we don't remember it, we don't live it. So
we spend too much time trying to figure it out when it's there.
Yes, and work the angles. What does it mean? And of course, major religions have done that until they've turned blue in the face and turned the rest of us blue in the face too. So Don Miguel is one of my favorites. I think the second
book, it's interesting because certainly the majority of your books, bar maybe just a couple, well, no, maybe just one, are all actual classics. I mean, they're all classics, but there's one book that doesn't quite fit in with the rest. We'll get to that one in a minute.
Okay.
But I mean, the second is a real classic, and it comes up again and again. Probably your list would probably echo if I was to go back over the 98 episodes that we've done and compile the list. I would imagine that your titles would be at the top.
Yes, well, good, because that's Louise. Yes, that's Louise Hay. All of Louise's work was exquisite, but you can heal your life came to me at a time when I didn't believe I could heal my life, my body, or anything very much. And it let me see, physical illness is very often a manifestation of a spiritual, personal, emotional crisis. And I felt that myself. I was very sick at one point in my life until I realized, a lot of this is being made worse by what's going on between my ears. So when I picked up Louise Hay's book a lot later, I thought, this is what I needed. And it's been that way ever since. And it's been wonderful to recommend to my counselees, my clients. I've always come back to, could there be an emotional or a spiritual component to what it is you're feeling, the way you're shaping your life, and your physical illness, the fact that you are unable to walk. Why might that be? What might be going on that leads you to be convinced you cannot walk or you cannot dance or whatever it is? So Louise Hay, in all her wisdom, blazed a trail very early on at a time when I'm sure a lot of people said, this is ridiculous. And with every passing year, more and more people are saying, as you just demonstrated, more and more people are saying this is the real thing. We must pay attention to that.
We're getting some more static now, Alan. I don't know where it's coming from and why it pops up after you've been talking quite clearly for several minutes. Okay, well, Chris is saying that it is staticky, but we can hear you. So let's give it a go and see what happens. If it really is awfully bad, then we'll continue, but we'll also have you back and do it all over again.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So is there anything more you want to say about Louise Hay?
Perhaps that was everything that needed to be said, that she was a trailblazer and she was speaking very directly. I mean, she even gives a chart that says, if you've got these physical symptoms, this is what the spiritual response might be that's worth looking at. And although it's not 100% reliable all the time, I'm sure it's reliable a lot of the time. So she handed power back to the reader in a world which is medicalized and takes power away from the patient on a regular basis. So I can't thank her enough for that. I wish she was still here for me to thank her.
You and millions of others. I mean,
again,
that's also a book that's worthy of being called a Bible, because I'm sure many people, consult it again and again and again. So book number 3, Be Here Now by Ram Dass.
Yes. Again, Ram Dass is charmingly straightforward because the title basically says it all. It says, Be Here Now. And it's the essence of Hinduism and the essence of Buddhism is you're here, be here, be present, pay attention. Don't sleepwalk through life. Don't get lost in the future projections. Don't give in to all that stuff that mulls over in one's brain about the past, especially at 3 o'clock in the morning when you can't sleep. He says, don't do it. Be here now. And how beautiful the world is. Now, he took a long time, you might say, in the book to spell that out, but he spells it out gently in a way that is so persuasive, and he tells us a lot about his own personal history, his move away from academia, which is all about the future and covering your back in case, and he's, no, be here now. What a marvelous piece of advice that actually, if I had tattoos, I'd probably have that tattooed on some part of my anatomy. I don't. So, so be here. Can you do it? Very hard to do.
Do you remember where you were at in your life at the time you read this book?
Yes, I was actually, I had just come to grips with my own near extinction when I was suffering with a lung ailment, which I had recovered from thanks to acupuncture and changing my attitude and changing just about everything else. And then years later, I said, I really have to look at what was going on for me. And that was when I picked up Ram Dass, and I said, that was my problem. I wasn't being present to what was. I was being everything else, but not that. And so I read this book and I said, I can't believe it's speaking straight to my heart so convincingly. So that happened. But, like most things, you have a major life event, and maybe it takes you 5 or 6 years to come to grips with it. You don't come to grips with it the same afternoon.
It takes time to process, yeah.
It takes a lot of time. And so I was ready, and the book jumped out at me, as so many books have done in my life.
They have a way of doing that, don't they?
They do. God bless them.
Like little guardian angels. Look at me.
I do like the guardian angels, I must say. They've been very, very, very patient with me.
Yeah. So book number 4 is Siddhartha.
Yes, book number 4 is Siddhartha.
Again, another one that comes up so many
Yes.
times, more than I can count.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very happy about that. I had read Siddhartha when I was very young, maybe 17. And then when I began teaching at Curry College, the person I was teaching with and myself, we said, let's bring in a book about transformation, about change. And we said, well, here's this nice short book, which is always good if you're teaching undergrads. It's called Siddhartha. And my colleagues said, oh, it's about India, you know, it's 500 years BC, they'll never get it. And we said, we'll try it anyway. And we did, and we kept teaching it each semester for, perhaps a dozen years. And each time it went deeper. It resonated with me. Because the story, in case people don't know, is the story of the person who later became the Buddha and what he goes through in order to strip away the illusions of life. He leaves his family, he goes into the city and becomes a wildly successful merchant because he doesn't care. He doesn't care. Throws the money around, more money comes. And then he decides to go for poverty. But on the way he has an affair with the most beautiful courtesan in the town because he wants to discover whether he can find himself in sex. And when he goes into poverty, he becomes, of all things, a ferry paddler. He paddles people across the river. And what a wonderful image that is of a teacher, someone who takes people from where they are and gently moves them to where they want to be. And maybe, if it's not really the place they want to be, he brings them back again. And I thought, what a wonderful, humble way of looking at the nature of learning, that we must cross the river many times in order to reach, as Siddhartha reaches at the end in his extraordinary, marvelous realization that he is able to transmit to Govinda, his best friend. Look at how spirituality has infused his life, I say to the people who read it, and look at the way it doesn't work out quite the way you expected or wanted or fantasized it would be. It's more. It's deeper. So Siddhartha, to me, is readable, memorable, speaks to the heart, and says the essential things that really have to be said.
So number 5, the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes.
Another classic.
Another classic, yes. Am I on a well-worn path here? Yes, the Bhagavad Gita is a Hindu text from extremely ancient roots. No one's quite sure how old it is. But in it, there is an immediate proposition that is thrown before us. And that is Arjuna, who is a prince, is just about to go into battle. And he doesn't realize that the person who's driving his chariot for him is actually the great god Shiva. And Arjuna looks around and says, killing people I know, what am I going to do? And much of the discussion is about what should I do? When should I do things that may seem hurtful? And it's very necessary because there are times in our lives when we have to do what's right, which those things are not popular and they're hurtful, and they hurt us to do them. And to be reminded that this is an archetypal activity, there's continued conflict with, but I don't want to do that. Yes, but you have to do your divine duty. Speak straight, act straight, do no matter what. And to have it in this ancient, wonderful, extraordinary story, that's been a must-read over and over again. I think the first time I read it, I thought, well, why is Arjuna such a whiner? Why doesn't he just get on with it? And then most recently, about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a major moral crisis in my workplace. And I said, well, what do? Do I make nice, as everyone else is doing? Do I placate everyone? Do I keep my mouth shut? Or do I speak up and say, look, this just isn't acceptable? And so I read the Bhagavad Gita and decided I must do what I had to do. And was it painful? Yes! But it was necessary. Otherwise, I think the situation would have got worse. I personally would have loathed my weakness for the rest of my days, I suspect.
Yeah.
And so I was the only one, one of the few people in the room speaking the truth, but then it helped others to speak their truth too.
Yeah. And how common an experience is that? I mean, we all know, we've all been there.
We've all been there.
And we all learn that speaking up is the best way.
It's the best way, whether you're talking to a toddler who's misbehaving, or a teenager, or a work colleague who really should have known better. Got to speak up.
Yeah.
Be impeccable with your word, as Don Ruiz says.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the next book is the one that sticks out a little bit.
Yes.
And that is, and it explains why you wrote your own books, your own book on this particular topic. The Grimm brothers,
yes.
Their tales translated by Manheim.
Yes.
And you say that these tales are not just disposable items for small children at bedtime. They contain deep wisdom. So tell us about the wisdom they contain.
Well, there is a huge amount of wisdom in these tales. They're not uniformly wise and good. Some of them are misogynistic, some of them are anti-Semitic, because the Grimm brothers collected tales that they felt were authentic. They didn't judge in terms of, making this a teaching tool. But the very finest of the Grimm brothers' tales, wow, they go right to the core of what it means to be alive, what it means to face growth issues. Because, of course, sometimes we tell them to kids because they're all about really people growing up. So the Frog King, for instance, which Disney has done quite a number on, the Frog King is about a young princess who has to grow up. And she stops being a spoiled princess with her golden ball and ordering a frog around and becomes someone else when she meets the frog, who is in fact going to be a king. And he's been bewitched. But in the time that he's been a frog, he has, as it were, gone down into the depths of the unconscious to find out who he really is, which is why he chooses her. He sees spirit in her and willfulness, and he says, that one would be a marvelous person to be able to live and work with. Now, I give you the example. That's just the very first story in the Grimm brothers' tales. In my book, I focus in on, I think, 20 of them. Tales which are so marvelous, so deeply moving, that they leave one changed. I've taught classes at colleges and various places with these tales, and you see people waking up and changing and going, oh, I never thought of it that way. And that, to me, is the guarantee that the literature that I'm relaying and attempting to interpret to my students, my counselees, is so powerful that it speaks over time. I mean, really, from the 1800s till now. I have several people who use the tales, as I have worked with them, use them in business settings to try and coach executives to say, look, here's a Grimm brothers tale that will speak to your situation. Let's look at it. Let's feel it. And that's the power of these tales.
What's your favourite?
Oh, well, my favourite is probably actually one that nobody ever talks about. It's called The Skillful Huntsman. Sometimes it's called just The Hunter. Obviously, punning on my name was not intended. And The Skillful Huntsman is really, really interesting to me because it shows the huntsman, who is the male protagonist, and the princess, who is the female protagonist, and they both have to grow as the story moves forward. So it's not just the princess grows up with a side issue of, what happens to the other figures. It really looks at both of them and is therefore able to say, oh, of course, They're learning so that they can become part of a relationship that will be authentic. I think it's a powerful, powerful story. Disney, Pixar did a version of it that is very entertaining, but utterly forgettable. In fact, I can't even remember what the full title of it is. And I watched it. It has Angelina Jolie in it. And I watched it and said, okay, fine. But we're missing the point, aren't we?
Yeah. You know, it strikes me as you're talking that this would make a great oracle deck.
Yes, actually, that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
A really good
You better get on that one before somebody else does.
Thank you for that idea. I'll be on the phone to my publisher tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, if you can learn something from every single one of them, they've all got a message.
Yes, they have.
Yeah.
And sometimes the messages are just extraordinarily powerful. Again, they speak to the heart, not to the head, but to the heart.
Yeah, well, call that publisher.
Yes, I will.
Book number 7, Spontaneous Healing, Andrew Weil.
Yes, well, spontaneous healing.
Yeah, you know, I have to say, this is a fabulous book, and this is the first time it's appeared on anyone's list.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Gosh, well, I remember when it was still quite new, and when many people were saying, oh, you know, spontaneous healing is just a statistical error, it can't mean anything at all. Now, of course, Andrew Weil has gone on to write many, many books, but I think this was the big groundbreaker because he dared to stand up as an MD and say, we don't know everything about healing. We can give you pills, we can cut bits off you, but we don't know about healing. Let's see how it might work when it is so-called spontaneous. You know, he risked everything in this very brave and very straightforward way because he has serious credentials. And for a while there, many of his colleagues wouldn't speak to him. But for me, at a personal level, I know about spontaneous healing. I've seen it. I've been there. I've felt it. Do we need modern medicine? Yeah, occasionally we do. We need it to nudge us on the way. Do we need acupuncture and Reiki? Yes, of course we do from time to time. But without whatever it is that is inside us, call it spirit, that wills that we want to connect with the whole and healed part of ourselves, nothing is going to change. And there's Andrew Weil saying it right there, up front and center, all those years ago. And I can't thank him enough. I can't thank him enough for blazing the trail.
I think he was one of the first that I took notice of. And I thought, what a courageous guy he is.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, someone else who knows about spontaneous healing is the author of your 8th book, which is Dying to Be Me by Anita Moorjani.
Yes.
What a beautiful book that is. And that one does come up again and again.
Yes. Oh, it's marvelous. And not just because Anita herself is such a modest and gentle person. She's just she's a sweetheart, you might say. But there she was, there she was, stage 4 cancer with growths on her body, and her family were called in, and they less than 12 hours to live, or 24 hours, very close. And the family was all there basically to say goodbye. And then she has this out-of-body experience, and she floats above her dying body and realizes there's something she still has to do. She could die, but she's actually something she still has to do, and something she still has to realize. She goes back into her body, and really talk about spontaneous healing. As she jokes in the book, she says they tested me for cancer a week afterwards and could find no traces. But then they kept testing her, and they still couldn't find any traces. I'm sure in the medical charts it still says, has cancer, but there's no sign of it. And then she, of course, went on to write this book to say that, in short, that it was trying to please everybody that had made her so sick that she was at war with herself. And that was when the cancer threatened to destroy her. I have so many clients I've had so many clients come through my hands who've been at war with themselves. I've been at war with myself, and it made me sick. And so I can look and say, if we can resolve this terrible tension that is pulling you to pieces, and recognize there is a spiritual side of you that really wants to be able to express itself, then we can solve a lot of ills very quickly. And so, Anita was just a very powerful confirmation. Again, she was one of those who spoke up at a time when it was not popular. And since then, many other people have spoken up and shared their near-death and after death, although they came back, after death experiences. And now it's no longer a taboo subject. It's no longer out the window. It's a case of, there's something happening here and we need to understand it, not throw it away. So yeah. Anita was, again, another person who helped to move me more, I think, down a spiritual path.
What's interesting about Anita's experience is that they actually had all the medical records. Her body was shutting down. They've got evidence of that. And that doesn't happen in every case. No. So, yeah, what a convincer.
Yes, it doesn't get more convincing than that, does it?
Exactly, yeah. And I love her message now, which is really that we have to get out of fear. Yes. Because it's fear that causes all the problems.
It's fear that causes the problems, yes. And there it is, boiled down to one sentence. Fear is what causes the problems. We've always known it, and most of us have still given in to fear anyway.
Yes, and there's a lot of people who like to prey on that. But we won't go down that route.
No.
Let's move on to book number 9, which is the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tsu.
Yes. Again, this is a very ancient text. Nobody's actually quite sure who the author was, but it's attributed to Lao Tsu. Wonderful, wonderful text that says again and again, in short and understandable forms, that it's not up to us to force the issue. It's not up to us to make things happen. It's up to us to allow ourselves to be in the flow so that we can be part of things that happen. And what I see again and again, and as a young man, I was very much guilty of this, is I felt I had to force things to happen. I had to go to places and make it happen. And there are lots of politicians who feel the same way. I've got to go there and make it happen. Which doesn't usually work. What happens if you make things happen is that, yes, sure, they change on the surface for a while, and then they drift back to something else because people go back to wherever it was they were before. But if we can be aware of flow, then we can see, oh yes, okay, things happen because there is a will for them to happen. And the will is a spiritual will, the will towards goodness, the will towards equality, towards generosity, all those things that we have within us that we cannot force. You can't force yourself to be good. You can do the right thing under duress, but it's not the same as just being good. Equality can't be legislated, although legislation helps. Equality has to be felt, where there is no difference between people. They just feel and know they are equal. And that comes from the heart. That doesn't come from the law books. It comes from an understanding of that flow, which is a human spiritual flow, the one that connects us to the Godhead, whatever you want to call it, the Great Spirit, the power that is in everything and is in us. So really just a magnificently powerful piece of work. Again, I read it when I was young and thought, okay, interesting. I read it when I was a little older and thought, I don't know what all the fuss is about. And then after I'd made lots of mistakes, I read it and said, oh, right. Now I get it. Oops. Yeah. So, yeah, one of my favorites again.
Good. Well, the last one is, I don't know whether I would call it one of the most famous books of all time, but certainly a massive seller, one that does turn up again and again. It definitely was one of my own bookworms on the No BS
Good.
website, because it had a big impact on me when I read it, and it is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Yes. The Power of Now. It's a bit like Ram Dass, be here now. The same word, now.
Yeah.
Can you be in the now? And what does it take to wave goodbye to all that comforting and comfortable stuff that stops us from being in the now? And that comforting and comfortable stuff is often fairly miserable, but it's familiar. We know it. We know it, and so we hold on to it, or rather, the ego holds on to it. And Eckhart Tolle is just brilliant at looking at the whole business of how the ego dogs us and tries to take us over. I mean, we need an ego, right? Because we have to make a few decisions along the way. But the trouble is, in our wonderful world of so many things that we can enjoy and so many places we can go, that the ego has a little too much freedom and is not being our servant. It's being our taskmaster, is driving us forward. Got to do this, you've got to do this. All that stuff about fear of missing out. I read that term some years ago. Fear of missing out. I mean, it makes you want to laugh, doesn't it? If it weren't so real. The number of people who say, oh, I've got to do that because everyone else is doing it. Well, guess what? No, you don't. You don't have to do anything, but your ego is terribly, terribly keen on you fitting in, on you being like everybody else, on you not being your own person. So Eckhart Tolle is very, very keen on just be your own person. Be here now and feel the power of now, because the power of now connects us to spirit, connects us to God, to whatever it is that orders and creates and makes this entire universe function. If we can be in that presence, the things that don't matter drop away. And the things that do matter, the enjoyment of, oh, I'm alive, I'm on earth at this amazing time, those are the things that rise upwards and will give us energy and power.
Yeah.
So
and there's no fear in the now.
There's no fear, no fear at all.
No.
Because now is the moment. Yeah. So again, it's a big book. It's a long book. Could it have been shorter, perhaps? But I don't think I want to change a single word of a single chapter.
No. Well, that's your 10 books. I want to talk about your travels and what you learned from traveling to so many different countries and living in so many different places.
Yes. Well, living in a lot of different places is a mixed blessing because one is very often a stranger. And one's not only a stranger, one can be seen to be a stranger at long distance. And so people will rush towards you, as a little man did when I was in Madagascar. And he immediately started to talk to me. And he spoke in French, and he discovered I was English. And suddenly he gave me the names of all of the soccer players on the England football squad, soccer squad, which I didn't know. I wasn't that much into soccer at the time. And so he was delighted to meet me, but what I got from him was that he was projecting a lot onto me. And that can be difficult. People want you to be something that you're not, and I could find myself becoming something that perhaps I wasn't. So while travel expands the horizons, and it did, I wouldn't undo any of it, it can also be strangely unrooting. The net result of my travels is I don't feel that close, really, to some aspects of my own country, England. I've lived in the United States now for 32 years. And I don't feel as though I'm truly an American, although I've got the passport. And when I go back to England, the country has changed. It's not the place. I'm sure this is ringing bells for you, Sandie. It's not the place I left.
Yeah.
So where do I belong? Where is my rootedness? And what does that do to one's sense of having a purpose in life? Many people feel they have a purpose in life because they're in a community surrounded by family that gives them a very strong sense of what they're there to do. Mm-hmm. By the same token, it doesn't deprive you of that if you've travelled around. I've made a home here, and I found that yes, I do have a purpose. I have my daughter is married and has kids, and so we have lots of grandkids, and I have a purpose there to help be part of making them grow, or allowing them to grow, I should say. It doesn't sound like much, but I wouldn't have thought there was anything more valuable than that. Being part of helping people to grow. Wow, I mean that's what I do. Whether it's with my counselees or with my books.
Exactly.
I try to help people to grow. But moving around, there are some countries that one feels perhaps more welcome in than others. European countries, for instance, would be those because I look European.
Yes.
So I fit in.
Yeah.
In India, I did not fit in. And so small children in large crowds would come running after me, yelling the only phrase of English, two phrases of English they knew, which is, "What is your name?" and "Give me a pen." And to have that echoing in your mind constantly for a 14-hour day is a little wearing. It's hard to concentrate on anything else. So that's when you have to be here now. Okay, this is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely you do. And you have to develop a sense of yourself.
Yes.
Because as you say, there's so much, different stimuli and things pulling at you that you really have to stay strong and centered in who you think you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Your books, I mean, they include titles like Stories We Need to Know, Reading Your Life Path in Literature, Write Your Memory, The Soul Work of Telling Your Life Story, The 6 Archetypes of Love, From Innocent to Magician. We've already talked about Princes, Frogs and Ugly Sisters.
You did, yes.
There's the Sanity Manual, which is a book of writing exercises that you've used for 30 years to help clients overcome blockages, which sounds very interesting, and a novel as well. What I want to ask you is, of all the books you've written, which one would you most like to see turn up on someone else's 10 best list?
Well, it's like, asking me to choose a favorite child, isn't it? Well, funnily enough, I was thinking about this just before we came online here, and I thought, which one of them do I think? And I think it would have to be Write Your Memoir. The soul, got it right here, in fact. Here it is. The soul work of telling your story. I'll wave it around to prove that I really do have it right here. I like that book very much because I started working with people writing, getting them to write their memoirs. That's what the Sanity Manual started off as, a series of exercises to dig deeper into who one is. And it seems to me that writing our memoir is perhaps the thing that all of us should do at some point in one's life.
Something I very much advocate. I mean, everybody has a book in them. Everybody has a unique story.
Yes.
And we can all learn from other people's stories.
We can all learn. Well, we can learn from our own stories. So I'll tell you a quick couple of things here, and that is, before he died, I worked with my father writing his life story. A tough thing to do, to work with your own parent. This is before I wrote the book. Write Your Memoir. And, the first time, I said, tell us tell us something about your life, Dad. You know, you never tell us anything. And he said, well, I prefer to write it. I said, okay. Then next year I came back to visit him from the States to England. And he said, well, I wrote my memoir. I said, oh, good. Can I see? He said, yes, but it's 2 pages. And I thought, he's nearly 80 and he's got 2 pages. All right. And I read them and they were fascinating. I said, wow, can you do a little more? Can you do a little more? By the time he'd finished, he had written 3 big binders full of memories, together with postcards and bits of memorabilia that he'd kept. And one of those memoirs became the story of his time as a prisoner of war, which was printed as From Coastal Command to Captivity. He told the story. He let me know who he was, which he hadn't done before. And I like to think, based on the evidence, that he came to a place of greater peace about who he was. Now, that couldn't have happened if he hadn't written his life story. He suffered from PTSD. He'd wake up in the middle of the night shouting, "Don't shoot." Or my mother says occasionally he would wake her up in the middle of the night because he was fighting with her, fast asleep, fighting. PTSD doesn't go away. No trauma goes away unless you take the time to take it seriously, to write, to feel the misery, and to move beyond it. And that's the same in my counselling work. I say, if we're going back to some miserable times, it's because we're going to move beyond it.
Yeah.
We're not going to stay in the mud and the gloop and the glumness. We're going to look at it in order to see what it gave you in the long run. So yes, write your memoir would perhaps be the one I would most like to see on other people's list, but I'd be so grateful if anyone put any of my books on that list.
Well, it is an important one. I'm always telling grandparents especially, your grandchildren have no idea who you are. All they see is what they see.
That's what they see.
And some of what they see is through their own parents' eyes as well, who don't know who you are.
Who don't know.
I mean, the biggest gift you can leave them is, these programs like, Who Do You Think You Are, where they're tracing people's genealogy. Everyone who goes through that process is changed afterwards.
Right.
And they have so much more understanding of themselves.
Yes.
And their history, if you like, their ancestry. And I think that it is something that we all should do. It should, as a matter of course, it's the biggest gift we could give the generations to come.
Yeah. I mean, they don't have to read it, but we have to do it in order to understand who we are. And then maybe one day they'll pick it up and they'll go, wow, I never really realized the old fella had so much stuff going on. Or maybe they won't.
Yeah, I mean, all those little stories that shape them that, they've forgotten about and we know nothing about.
Yes,
we
know nothing about. Because trauma and, as you say, the stories, experience, pass on from generation to generation. And you don't want your great-grandkids to still be suffering from the trauma that your grandfather had when he was, they all went through world wars, didn't they? I mean, what bigger trauma is there than that? Yeah. And trauma does hand itself on. Some of my father's foibles from being a prisoner of war, I discovered that I had them myself. So I don't need to behave that way. That doesn't correspond to my life experience, but I learned it from him.
That emotional DNA. I've heard it, happen in cultures as well. Where so many people in Germany after the war were so depressed because they carried this energy, and it took a long time for that to begin to, people to move through that. Yes,
well, I think actually they're still moving through it. So I think the young people in Germany, the ones I've spoken to, still feel it, and they wish they didn't, but it's there. So
now, final question.
Yeah.
What are you reading now?
Oh goodness! Well, I'm doing my usual trick of reading about 3 books at the same time.
Which 3?
Well, strangely enough, I'm reading two books by the same person, a poet called Clint Smith, who has written, what's the title now? Counting Descent, a book of poems about what it means to be a young black person in the United States. I mean, talk about trauma handed on from generation to generation. Very wonderful poems. And I'm also reading his prose work, in which he, as a young black man, goes and visits sites in the United States where slavery happened. So he visits, Jefferson's estate, Monticello. He visits Attica prison, and so on, and looks at it through the eyes of what's the history that we're suppressing here. That book is called How the Word is Carried. Wonderful title. And what he realizes, of course, is that you don't just go out there and say, as Lincoln did in 1865, slaves are all free now. It doesn't change. It takes generations to get free of that sense of being kept down, even if white supremacists weren't around to keep on doing it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are quite a few who seem to be intent on that. So it's a very, very moving, very powerful pair of books that I'm dealing with right now.
And the third one?
The third one, well, strangely enough, is also by someone called Smith. It's a woman called Emma Smith, who is writing, of all things, about Shakespeare, one of my favorites. And she's a professor at Oxford, my old alma mater, and she's writing a very entertaining book in which she argues something that I'm so glad to hear and see articulated. What she's saying is Shakespeare doesn't give you answers. He asks questions. And it's in the asking of the questions that the audience gets whatever it is that enriches them. And so, for instance, she has a wonderful analysis of Romeo and Juliet, which we all think we know, and which we've all heard and seen more times than we care to mention. And what she says is, come to the end of the story, can we condemn the two families? Well, we can condemn the two families for not being particularly friendly. Can we condemn these two people for suicide, which in a Christian society at the time would send you straight to hell? Or do we even want to condemn them? Can we praise them? No. Do we feel sympathy for them? Yes, even though they sometimes behave in outrageously uncontrolled ways. And that, it seems to me, is a wonderful way to look at this play and all Shakespeare's plays, because again and again he asks us not to sit back and say, oh yeah, those are the good guys, those are the bad guys, know what to do, know what to think. Shakespeare again and again comes towards us and says, so what do you make of this? What do you think's going on here? And of course, that's why actors love to play Shakespeare. Yeah. That's why audiences adore, to this day, going to the South Bank Centre in London and it's raining and they're in the pit there and they're watching the Shakespeare players. And wow, it moves you in extraordinary ways. So that refusal to categorize. I mean, there are no out-and-out villains in Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Even Richard III is kind of charming and charismatic and obviously not a good guy.
In the book. In the book,
yes, and history may well vindicate him one day.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, that sounds fascinating. And yeah, I mean, I don't think Shakespeare has turned up on anybody's list.
Oh, really?
No, I don't think it has. And I think it would be very hard, to pick one of his books, one play, one whatever. But certainly the mark he's left on history is just phenomenal. I mean, equal to any of the classics that you've talked about tonight.
I think so. I mean, certainly to me, and I do remember I happily taught Shakespeare to undergraduates and graduates for many years. And often the students would come to the end of a class and say, so what's the answer? So what are we meant to think?
Yeah, yeah.
And that would be the set of students who really wasn't quite up to speed. And the other side of the room would say, that's the whole point. He's not telling us the answer.
Yeah, he's making us think.
Yeah, and in today, when so many people just want to be spoon-fed an answer, why is the economy bad? Oh, it's immigrants. Not really. Let's think about this one a little further. Why is the Democratic Party bad? Because they want to take our guns. Well, let's just parse this out a little bit. So it's a kickback, it seems to me, against easy answers.
Yeah.
When I worked in the prisons, people kept saying, things like, well, way to deal with criminals is you put them on a chain gang and have them, mow the sides of the roads. I said, right, that's a really simple answer to a terribly complicated question. Why people offend and why they keep offending. So Shakespeare to me is sort of the pushback, the antidote, and I hope he will never go out of fashion.
I don't think he will. He hasn't done so far. He's got longevity, for sure.
Got legs.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan, I want to say thank you for contributing your 10 best list of books
I
to
should be
the
thanking
OBS
you.
library. I hope it was a really good experience for you.
Oh, yes.
And it's certainly a good experience for us. And if you go ahead with that suggestion, which I certainly hope you should, I want to receive the first Oracle deck off the press.
Done. and I will be much more grateful than just that, believe me.
Well, yeah, think about it, because I think that is the perfect Oracle deck.
Yes.
Got, yeah, absolutely. And it's a great one for kids too.
It is. Ooh.
Get going.
Well,
get going.
Yes, and thank you again. Yeah. This has been so much fun, Sandie. It's always such a pleasure to speak with you. It's great.
You too. And thank you so much for taking the time. And it's interesting how the static has disappeared.
Isn't it? Yeah. Sometimes problems solve themselves.
Sometimes they do, if you give them time. Absolutely. Well, that's it for this show. We'll be back at the same time next week with another edition. And till then, it's me and from Allan Hunter. Thank you, Alan.